We have the new stars of the film Hands of Stone. That's in theaters this Friday. Usher and Edgar Ramirez will be joining us, so stay tuned for that. But, gentlemen...
Usher's a special individual. You do know that, right?
I do. I've seen him in concert.
She has the same birthday.
Oh, as you?
It's your boy. You know,
oh, it's always about you. Oh, yeah.
And you know what?
Now I think of him differently.
What about me?
Yeah.
What about me?
You guys ready to work?
Yes, always.
All right, let's do this. You knew there couldn't be a Josh Norman interview without the Odell Beckham Jr. question. Courtesy of ESPN, the magazine, this piece is also in newsstands Friday. So Norman spoke on the contentious matchup in Week 15. We all remember this last season, where Beckham was charged with 3 personal fouls, saying, "Everybody saw what he was. People from around the league were coming up to me afterward and saying, he does that crap all the time. He lost so much respect from people from that little tantrum. I've already got a couple people telling me, okay, I've got a hit out on him. It's going to be a rough for him this year, and he brought it on himself." Stephen A., Norman, friend of the show, is he going too far?
He's absolutely going too far, and I think that Josh Norman's got to calm down because of some of the things that, you know, he says. We all know how panicky the league is in this day and age. I know that Josh Norman's a good brother. I know that his heart's in the right place. He's got a mouth on him, but that has served him well, and he shouldn't be condemned for that. We get all of that because when you come from Coastal Carolina and you work your way up to the ranks where you're being recognized one of the premier corners in the game, clearly he knows what's working for him, and the mouth is a part of it. Fair enough. But the flip side to it all is that when you say things like, you know, a hit out on a play and things of that nature, you know that the league is going to get its antennas up. That's just not smart. That's just not a smart thing to say. That's just not a smart thing to do. And for anybody that would try to dismiss it, understand that's not going to fly because the NFL is not going to dismiss it. The NFL is going to keep a keen eye on things. When you go up against the New York Giants, the game could potentially be called tight. You see how many defensive players complain about the NFL all the time. This is what happens. They're saying you got bad breath. They'll call you for a penalty against these guys on offense in this day and age, especially one of the premier players in the league. And so when you've got Odell Beckham Jr., who's an absolute stud and a star on the rise to superstar status, when he goes up against Josh Norman, chances are he's going to get a lot of calls. If he keeps his head and he keeps his cool, chances are the league rules facilitate alone that he may end up getting the better of Josh Norman because Josh Norman may get penalized a whole bunch. You just never know. When you open your mouth, you put yourself in that kind of precarious situation, and Josh Norman is smarter than that. And you have to be smarter than that. For him to sit up there and to call out Odell Beckham Jr. that way, you're just inviting a significantly heightened level of eyeballs and cynicism aimed in your direction. It's counterproductive to you. It's counterproductive to the Washington Redskins. It's counterproductive to all parties involved on your side because, again, the rules are stacked against you alone. So you got to know this kind of stuff, and you got to guard against it. And I don't think he's doing that at all. I think that he's been opening his mouth entirely too much since he's arrived in the nation's capital with his 5-year, $75 million contract and $50 million guaranteed. He's going to tell you, I'm after it. I got to go get it. And he's definitely dedicated to it. He's going to put in the work. He's going to be on his grind. I definitely believe he's going to be one of the best in the game. But you have to be cognizant of the kind of position that you're putting yourself in, because there are uncontrollable situations that exist in the sport of professional football. And when you're not sensitive enough to that and you don't guard against that, you can put yourself and your team in a precarious situation. And it's just unfortunate to listen to Josh Norman talk so much about this kind of stuff because he doesn't realize what he's doing. I hope he's ready, because he had better be ready, considering how much talking he's been doing.
Let me tell you what I think is going on here. Josh Norman, when he hooked up with Odell Beckham last year, and Odell, the most receiving yards in the history of the NFL through his first 2 seasons. Odell, when they did a survey of the most famous athletes in the world, the most famous football player worldwide was Peyton Manning at the time. The second was Odell Beckham. Odell was this young, as you mentioned, stud superstar receiver, and Josh Norman was able to get under his skin the first game when they first linked up. He got under his skin, and it resulted not only in Odell losing his cool and getting himself into trouble, but also I think maybe even Odell dropping a couple passes where he burnt Norman. He was open, and the ball was in his hands, and a guy who, other than those 2 passes, never dropped a pass in his NFL career, suddenly drops a pass. So I think he did get under his skin, but I think what's happened is Odell has returned the favor right now. I think Odell Beckham has pointed out that the reason people were talking about Josh Norman is because of Odell Beckham. And here it looks to me like Josh Norman's trying to disprove that theory by talking about a whole lot of stuff that's not Odell Beckham. Now, of course, he's going to be asked about Odell, and I agree with you, Stephen. I thought he spoke irresponsibly about it, maybe getting himself into a little trouble there. He adds Demaryius to who he's talking about.
Which we will get into later.
We're going to get into it. He adds the commissioner.
Which we will get into.
I mean, like, he's talked about everybody.
But Odell has succeeded, it seems to me, in getting under Josh Norman's skin now in the offseason, at least. In the preseason, the way Josh Norman succeeded in getting under Odell's skin. That's what this seems like to me on many topics, but certainly on the topic of Odell, who, by the way, had he not dropped those 2 passes, as it was, 6 receptions, 76 yards, the game-tying TD in the fourth quarter, had he not dropped those 2 passes, would have been about 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think Norman is feeling a certain kind of way about that.
Well, you could say that Norman's feeling a certain kind of way about that. I don't think that's what the case is. I don't think he's feeling a certain kind of way about that. I think that he's feeling himself because he thinks of himself as the best cornerback in the world, that has a huge contract, that's overcome a lot of barriers, which he has, and should be applauded for and commended for. The flip side to it is that you've got to have the foresight to look ahead and think about the league that we're talking about here. This is the National Football League. Even though he could just be talking out of his you-know-what, when you sit up there and you say, hey, well, I've spoken to plenty of guys, it's hits out on this guy, et cetera, et cetera. You're clearly talking about what's transpiring on the football field. I'm simply saying that the NFL is watching it because once you go up against Odell Beckham Jr., you're going to find yourself in a situation where it's going to be called tight. And when things are called tight, who does that usually work against? It works against the defender, not the offensive player who's running his routes. And we're talking about an elite receiver in Odell Beckham.
That Norman can't do anything with anyway. Well, Norman couldn't do anything with him in the first link-up.
Go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to interrupt you. Sorry.
All right. I'm letting you look at Odell. Clearly, he's got lightning speed. He's got mad skills. We all know this. Josh Norman's got some stuff to prove, and let's just put it out here. When I speak to NFL, I am I defer. The reason why I know so much is because I speak to the people who actually do know. It's not that I'm watching and scouting myself and saying I'm not at a football practice and I'm saying, I know what I'm seeing. No, it's not just that. It's that I got this Rolodex in my phone, and I pick up and I talk to Hall of Famers who played a particular position. I talk to aficionados who cover this sport for decades. I talk to coaches. I talk to GMs. I talk to these people, okay? And so what happens is they enlighten you about what's going on. When we talk about Josh Norman, I bring up the name Josh Norman, every single individual. I'm talking about all-pro, all-world Hall of Fame corners. I'm talking about all-pro, all-world Hall of Fame wide receivers. I'm talking about coaches. I'm talking about scouts. Every single individual that I've spoken to about Josh Norman has said this. He's very gifted. He works his tail off. He deserves credit. However, he's not the fastest corner in the world, A, and B, he's limited with what he can do. Now, to Josh Norman's credit, when he and I have spoken, he emphatically debunks that, says guys ain't watching film. There's been plenty of times he was in one-on-one situations, not just benefiting from a zone scheme. He always says that. But they say, look, he has limitations. He can't cover the quicker receivers. He can't cover dudes in the slot. This is what they say about him. So if this is true, what you have is a situation where Josh Norman is coming into this season anxious to prove himself. Deshaun Jackson sits there, talks with me about Josh Norman. He said, look, man, this dude goes after it. He said, we in practice, I get the better of him. He's sitting there like, where you going? We got work to do. He's mad that the coaches are stopping practice and giving us the rest of the day off. He wants to stay out there and work his tail off. He goes after it, and it's making us better. This is what Deshaun Jackson said about Josh Norman. So what does that mean? That means he's willing to work hard. He's willing to do what he's supposed to do. The problem is, here's what ultimately could be Josh Norman's doom. If you talk too much and bring too much attention to yourself, you may bring the wrong kind of attention, because if there's anybody that can stop him, it's officiating. And if officials get in your way because they're calling the game too tight and not letting you go out there and play mano-a-mano up against that dude that you want to go against, Josh Norman will lose it because, look, that's not what he wants to do.
Well, one of the things that makes him such an excellent player, he's actually one of my favorites to watch, even though he plays for a team I root against,
big time.
Giants fan. Is his competitiveness. You think of like a guy like Cortland Finnegan, who's known for like getting into fights a lot, but one of the things that made him effective was Cortland Finnegan was so competitive, and this guy's like a more talented version of that. But now he's got to live up to a $75 million contract, and one of the reasons he got paid is not only due to his excellence, but due to scarcity at the position. You know, go find shutdown corners. Now, I'm not saying he is one, but elite corners, there aren't that many by definition. But just because you're the best at your position, or one of the 2 or 3 best, doesn't mean you're Deion Sanders or Champ Bailey or Darrelle Revis in his prime. There are levels. So you can be a level or 2 below that and still be among the best at your position and therefore get paid that way and then have all this pressure on you to defend in this day and age where, as you mentioned, you don't want officiating going against you. The rules are all favoring the receivers, and you got some killer receivers in your division.
Last point.
Yeah.
Number 1, speed, change of direction are considered his 2 biggest impediments. His ability to change directions as a corner. But number 2, and more importantly, in terms of his mouth, there's somebody else on the Redskins who used to talk an awful lot.
Yes.
D'Angelo Hall. You know, now, you might get that from him a little bit because D'Angelo Hall was an elite trash talker. Backed it up a lot of times to be respected. But when we were at Washington's training camp in Richmond, Virginia, even though he's straight up, because he's as real as it gets, I'm talking about D'Angelo Hall, he was still somebody that clearly saw that, you know, I got to be a little bit more humble. Father Time, I still got it, but you recognize what you can and can't do anymore, and you got to be mindful of that.
I got to say, I admire a guy who will go and talk the kind of talk that Norman is talking right now.
If he backs it up.
Given the fact that he knows he's in a division with killer receivers he's going to have to see twice a year. So whether or not he backs it up, right, ultimately, if he doesn't back it up, it's bad for the team. Now he's put everybody out there and everything and you know, is talking and not backing it up. But the fact that he's willing to talk, given the contract, given who he's going up against twice a year, Odell Beckham and Des Bryant, these guys, is, you know, the guys who can back it up, those are my favorites.
No, I get it, and I like him. He sat at this desk a couple of times, like Josh Norman. My only issue, I like the trash talking, the confidence, is when he's speaking of Odell Beckham specifically, he said he brought this upon himself. People are going to be coming after him. Well, it's like he's throwing stones and being a hypocrite because he's also going to be bringing it upon himself as well when he's opening up his mouth. That was my only thing with that
the corners
particular
don't get
comment
hit like
towards
receivers.
But still, and whether it's the officiating or people trying to go after him, that type of thing. So, we're going to stay with Norman here. So since he's joined Washington, he's been outspoken about his team's name, the Redskins.